Okay, the piss test here. I'm going to talk about Tim Duncan versus Kobe Bryant because I think it's actually really important in a way. I know there's a lot of Kobe fans out there who's probably really pissed off for me to say Duncan is better, but I'm going to try and prove it. Now I'm going to talk a lot of stats, and the reason why is because I think when you accumulate a lot of statistical evidence, you can tell things. Now, if you're not interested in stats, you may as well just go away. Now, I know people say stats lie and stats misleading, but the truth is that's all you've really got to go by. And I know they don't tell the whole picture, and I know if you misinterpret them, you can come up with the wrong conclusions, but I think you can get a really good picture overall of a player if you take a lot of things into consideration. Now, first I want to talk about the awards. And we'll forget stats for a moment because awards are, kind of what people judge players by in a way. And I know a lot of people actually look at Kobe and say, well, he's won 5 championships, Tim Duncan's won 4, so Kobe's better than Tim Duncan. Well, I mean, if people know basketball, they know it's a team game, and they know that no player is singularly responsible for winning championships, so I don't really actually see that argument as valid. So we'll look into the awards for a start. Tim Duncan has 2 MVPs and 3 finals MVPs. Kobe Bryant, 1 MVP, 2 finals MVP. Now right there, that cancels out the championships right there. That makes it even. Now if we look at some other awards like the All-Team NBA or the All-Defensive or All-Star selections, I don't want to go into them, but they're pretty much equal. So in the end, I think all the awards and accolades and all that shit just cancels each other out. Now, I want to start with offense because I think offense actually favours Bryant. And I think you're going to have to be an idiot to argue otherwise. I mean, you can look at his 31,000 points and look at Timmy's 23,000 points or 24. And people will go, well, obviously, Bryant's better. But the thing is, even though Bryant's got more assists and points, there are other things to take into consideration, like true shooting percentage. Now, they're equal in that, so I'm not going to argue that, but that's very important. True shooting percentage is really important in basketball. But they're equal. So offensively, I think so far, Kobe's looking way better. But what people don't take into account is offensive rebounds and turnovers for some reason. Now, offensive rebounds are one of the best things you can do on the offense, so I don't know why they don't take it into consideration. Turnovers is one of the worst things, or the worst thing you can do on offense. So I don't know why people ignore that. But if you look at that, Timmy's got more offensive rebounds, way more, and less turnovers. So that brings his offensive rating up. In fact, if you look at the offensive rating over their careers, Kobe's 112, Timmy's 110. So the whole thing is I think Kobe still wins on offense. But it's not as distant as people think it is. But then people say, well, Kobe's good in the clutch. Now, I don't actually believe in the clutch, because I think the first, and a lot of people say this, the first basket's important as the last basket. Now, really, a good team can put away another team within the first 10 minutes if they're doing the right things. So really, the end of the game wouldn't matter in that case, because they're doing things right in the first place. So I think the clutch can be good because, yeah, maybe your nerves are on the line and you're good under pressure, but really it's a non-factor overall. And even if you look at Kobe's clutch stats, they aren't all that good. They're right there on the internet. You can have a look at it. They're not really all that good compared to the really good clutch players. Well, people might say, well, then he turns it up in the playoffs and is more consistent, but that's not true either. He's actually a worse performer in the playoffs than he is in the regular season if you look at the stats. And Timmy is actually the same overall. He's a more consistent performer than Kobe during the playoffs. I'm not saying he's a better offensive player or anything like that, but he is better or equal to what he is in the regular season than he is in the playoffs. Now, Kobe isn't as good in the playoffs as he is in the regular season. You can look at the stats for yourself. So all this clutch stuff is absolutely rubbish. Anyway, next thing we could sort of look at the teammates. Now, firstly, people would say, well, Timmy's got better teammates because he's got the trio of Parker, Ginobili, and himself for most of the time, they're all great players, right? But when you look at Kobe's teammates, there are actually just as many good players as Timmy's played with. For example, Shaq. Timmy has never played with anyone as good as Shaq was in the early 2000s. He just hasn't. And then you look at Gasol. Gasol is actually considered by a lot of people to be soft, which is incorrect. He might be a little bit soft on defense, but his stats all around are good. He's a good rebounder. He shoots well. He passes well for a big man. His stats are really good. And people give him a lot of shit when the Lakers lose, and I think that's really unfair. Next is Odom, who is actually really good too. He's got a great all-round game. I mean, he's not as good as Pippen, but who he is. He's actually really good defensively. He's an awesome rebounder. And in general, he just does everything really well. Also, Robert Horry. You've got Horry, who, let's face it, is handy when you need him. They say about Horry is that he only turned up during the playoffs. He only started playing well during the playoffs. And you look at the stats, and that's what the story tells. He's great. He's excellent when it comes playoff time. And you look at someone like Derek Fisher, who a lot of people give shit as being a crap point guard, but he actually was good for them offensively. He shot well from the three-point line and did hardly any turnovers. And he was consistent. So really, if you look beyond those five players, you could say that the Lakers have also experimented with a lot of older stars. And I'm going to cancel them out because basically they're past their prime. So they don't really count as good players. For example, Horace Grant, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, and Steve Nash, right? So I'll just wipe them out. They're some of the best players of all time, but I won't even count them because they're past their prime. Now, we could talk about Howard, but it's obvious that this season has been a disaster, so I won't even count him. So that's five players that you can actually say, well, are worth talking about. Now, with Timmy, you've got Robinson, Parker Ginobili, Bruce Bowen, who was a defensive master, and Robert Horry for the same reasons as on the Lakers. And that's pretty much it. That's five players, the same as Kobe. You can talk about old players like Michael Finley, Terry Porter, or an injured Sean Elliott. Or you could talk about Avery Johnson, but he was old at the time and only played at the start of Timmy's career. I mean, you could talk about the Australian players who I've got a particular bias for, like Shane Heal, Patrick Mills, and Andrew Gaze. But the thing is that that's my particular bias, so we won't count them either. So each of them have five particular players that have been good players that have been with them throughout their career. Now, next thing is coaching. Now, I think this is a draw too, because Timmy's had a good coach throughout his career. Throughout his career, it's been awesome. Kobe's had the best coach of all time for most of his career, Phil Jackson. Now, if you look at the Lakers after Shaq without Phil Jackson, they've actually been a mediocre team, about 50%. They haven't performed well at all. And if anything, it's a demerit to Kobe, because you could tell he's just not an inspiring player. He needs an inspiring coach to actually bring the best out of his players. The thing about Kobe is, I think he's way too arrogant for people to want to actually play well for him. Whereas Timmy is humble and doesn't think it's all about him. But it's hard to tell because Timmy's pretty much had the same coach all along. So we can cancel that out too. Now this is the thing. I think up until this point, actually Kobe has the edge. But we've got to consider one more thing, and that's defence. Now they've got pretty much the same defensive awards, but essentially a big man's defence is more important than a guard's defence. And this is really quite obvious because you've got a lot of like 7'6" defensive stiffs. Well, they're not defensive stiffs, they're stiffs. They can't do anything but play defence in the league for a long time because interior defence is more important than exterior defence. You look at Sean Bradley or Manute Bol, they would never have any careers unless they are good at altering shots. And that's what really defence is about. Even though steals and blocks help and rebounding help, it's really about forcing these shots. And this is why I'm not going to talk about steals, blocks and rebounds. And lucky for Kobe, because he would lose out if I started talking about that. It's all about missing shots, forcing missed shots. And this is the thing. Now, Kobe is actually really good at one-on-one defence. And this is why he's on the defensive teams. The coaches actually decide who are the best defensive players. And they see the one-on-one defence and they say, he's a good defender. And he is a good defender. He's an excellent one-on-one defender. He can shut down a man so well. But overall, and there's been statistical analysis on this, he actually is not a good off-the-ball defender. He actually sags off his man off the ball, allowing him to get jump shots and easy cuts to the basket, which almost cancels out his good one-on-one defence. Now, the same can't be said about Timmy. He's one of the best defensive players of all time, and I want to prove this to you. First of all, there's something called a plus-minus finder on basketballreference.com, and I know that's probably advertising, but I don't care. Now, what I've done is done a filter for it. Multiple seasons per 100 possessions from 2001 to this season, in the regular season and playoffs, requiring at least 40,000 possessions sorted by ascending opponents' points. Now that sounds like a lot of shit, but really what it means is that you are a consistent defender over time, but in a way it's talking about team stats as well. So it's kind of tells if you're on a good defensive team. And it's no surprise that a lot of Spurs in this. And defence is not sexy. So, you know, I mean, a lot of the Spurs just don't get credit for being good players. But number one is Bruce Bowen. Number two is Tim Duncan. 3, Ben Wallace. Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Kevin Garnett, Rasheed Wallace, Jermaine O'Neal, Jason Kidd, Luol Deng, Paul Pierce, Kenyon Martin, Richard Jefferson, Shane Battier, Metta World Be Peace, Richard Hamilton, LeBron James, Tayshaun Prince, Chelsea Billups, Kirk Hendricks. Now that's the top 20. I won't go through all of them, but we'll continue. Shaquille O'Neal, Derek Fisher, both Lakers, Tyson Chandler, Vince Carter, surprisingly, Dwayne Wade, Lamar Odom, another Laker, Andrei Kirilenko, Sean Marion, Marcus Camby, Dirk Nowitzki. Amazing. He's actually a decent defender by the look of it. And blah, 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 blah. 44, Kobe Bryant. Now, that might say a lot about team defence, but really it says a lot about individual defence too. Now, I don't want to end it there, because there's something that even more telling than that for defence, and that's called basically off-court defence stats. In other words, when you're on the court, what does your team perform? And when you're off the court, how does your team perform? Now, Timmy has a rating of -5. That means that when he's on the court, the team in 100 possessions is 5 points better off than the opposition. So roughly 5 points a game in defence. That's what he's better at. That's how he makes his team better, in defence. That's almost legendary. I mean, Ben Wallace, who's obviously one of the best defenders of all time, has a -6 rating. And you have other guards or in other positions, at Metta World Peace, who is a great defensive player, who has something like -3. Now look at Kobe. He's actually worse when he is off the court. The team is better defensively when he's off the court. Now, this could say that his backups are better defensively. Well, why the hell aren't they on the all-defensive team? Now, Kobe basically gets all these awards for his man-on-man defense, but the stats through the accumulation show that he's not that great. I'm not saying he's bad, but he's just not that great. Tim Duncan is great defensively. In fact, he's better defensively than Kobe is offensively. And that's the point. This is the nail in the coffin for the whole argument. Timmy's defense makes him better. Now, I want to go into passing a little bit, because I think I've proven my point, but I just want to add something. Kobe during this season was lauded for his 14 assist games, etc., which is good. And the team started winning, which is great. But Kobe started talking about, well, I always wanted to know what it's like to be like Magic Johnson. Well, during that period where he was passing, he actually only averaged 8 assists and 4 turnovers. Now that is actually not all that good. That's not Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson was 11 assists and 3.5 turnovers. That's something like a 3-to-1 ratio, not a 2-to-1 ratio. If my point guard was doing a 2-to-1 ratio, I'd bench the motherfucker. I'm sorry. And you might be upset that I'm comparing him to a point guard, but that's not what I'm doing. That's what Kobe's doing. He's comparing himself to a point guard. Now, if you actually compare his passing to shooting guards, it's actually quite good. An average of 2-to-1 is quite good for a shooting guard, but he does less than that. Now, Jordan actually did 8 assists for a single season with a better than 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, while leading the league in scoring and shooting over 60% true shooting percentage. Those are mind-boggling stats. I don't know what Kobe was scoring when he was passing, but he wasn't doing that. Now, you look at some of the best shooting guards. They all have a roughly around 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio or better. Drexler, Dumas, Jordan, all the same. And believe it or not, someone like Jeff Hornacek, who most people think was just a white chump, who was actually really an awesome player, was better than a 2-to-1 ratio. In fact, if you look at a lot of the modern shooting guards, the best elite shooting guards, they all have a better assist-to-turnover ratio than Kobe. I mean, you're looking at, I've got them written down here. Brandon Roy, Ginobili, Ray Allen, Wade, Tracy McGrady, and Joe Johnson all have a better assist-to-turnover ratio than Kobe Bryant. So why is anyone kissing Kobe's ass about his passing? I've got no idea. Anyway, just to wrap it up, Kobe, if you're listening, you're not Magic Johnson. You're not Michael Jordan, and you're not even Tim Duncan.